This morning we'll be considering what is often thought of as the most difficult of Jesus' parables, the parable of the unjust steward in Luke chapter 16. Again, if you'd like to have this book and you haven't done so already, you can go to shawneetrail.org, and there you can click on Bible class and choose the PDF download of Tough Texts, and you can keep it. You can scroll through it, whatever you would like to do with it. It is yours to use. In Luke chapter 16, Jesus is telling a parable that has caused a lot of mental gymnastics for people to look at and try to understand and comprehend, but I think most of the difficulties with this actually come from a couple of assumptions that people tend to carry into the parable. We, in other words, decide a couple of the characters and who they represent, and then we're having a really difficult time because of some of the things that Jesus says about those individuals. But I want to suggest to you that if we just strip that away, and we do not come in with an assumption on who the characters represent, and then we consider who Jesus is speaking to and their reaction to his words, we can actually walk away with a much better understanding of the parable and be able to take some good lessons for ourselves from it. All right, so Luke 16, the parable of the unjust steward. You've probably read it. You've probably heard different lessons from it. And I am confident that what I'm about to say to you during this lesson is not what you've heard before. And I then know that you have to give a defense for things of that nature. But what I want to suggest really is that if we use the same rules of interpretation that we've been using through all of our tough texts in this class, we're going to be able to walk away with a pretty good grasp of what's going on. When we look at any of our tough texts, the primary consideration before we consider the text itself is the context in which it's being spoken. If you pull any passage out of its context, we end up in a situation to where we're having some mental gymnastics in order to explain things, or we end up doing this proof texting thing. And even in our own brotherhood, we are guilty of this, where we read some text, we don't really pay attention to the context, but we say we believe these other things theologically, so this text must be teaching one of those things. And in reality, a lot of times, that's not at all what's under consideration. But because we ignored the context, we end up in this verse war. So we're talking with someone, and they're saying, well, look, this verse says this. And then we're like, hey, you know what? This verse says this. And so we're throwing passages at each other. And this is certainly not good Bible exegesis. We want to instead stop and consider what God's Word said in all of its context. Because at the end of the day, this is one of those things we should have no dog in a theological fight. We are disciples. We are learners from God. It is not our job to defend some position. It is our job to learn from God. Now, yes, we defend the Scripture against others, but ultimately, we're trying to learn from God. We are students. We are disciples of Christ. So as that goes, we are trying to hear and learn and not tell Jesus what he's saying. And we don't want to get into a situation again to where we're just taking part of what Jesus says and others are taking part of what Jesus says. And now we're arguing with one another, all with what Jesus says. Let's go back to the beginning and say, who are we? We are disciples. And this is a great text to illustrate that because we're looking to Jesus himself and something that he has to say. And we are trying to learn from him. Parables were not meant to just create confusion, although some parables were confusing, and the disciples would go back to Jesus afterwards and say, what does this mean? Explain this parable to us. But ultimately, Jesus' desire is that when he tells things in story form, we come to a greater understanding. And he would say, do you not understand this yet? We're working to get to a place to where we can hear the lessons, we can hear the stories, and say, okay, this is what God wants me to understand. All right, we're going to be reading this all together. I know it's a lot of words up on your screen there. This is Luke 16, 1 through 9. So if you'd like to open in your own Bibles and read along with it, it says, now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, And this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, 'What is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be manager.' The manager said to himself, 'What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I'm not strong enough to dig. I'm ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from my management, people will welcome me into their homes.' And he summoned each of his master's debtors. And he began saying to the first, 'How much do you owe my master?' And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, 'And how much do you owe?' And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, 'Take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings.'" The parable of the unjust steward is, like I said, considered the most difficult of Jesus' parables by many. However, the difficulties result not from the words I want to suggest to you of Jesus, but from the baggage that we bring to this text. Preconceived ideas about who is represented here. Since Luke is the only writer to record this parable, we can't look to any other accounts of it and see any differences. We have to look just here into this text. And in this instance, the end, I think, can help us to understand it better than the beginning. So let's take a few things. First of all, I want to give you a bit of a just overview, because there was a lot of words we had up on the screen. So let's just kind of give the summary of the parable. You have this rich man who has a financial manager. And the rich man says, "You've been doing a terrible job. I want an accounting of all of your management. You're no longer going to be a manager for me." This is as though you have a business and you've hired a CPA or a controller or something. And after a while, you realize they've really messed things up. And so you go to that controller like, "I want a full accounting of the work that you've done. I'm about to fire you. This is done. You've messed this up, but I need to see what's happened." And so this CFO or COO or whatever you want to have in the blank here, that person in this situation, they don't think, "Well, I'll go get another job." This person's saying, "Oh no, I'm in real trouble here. I'm not going to be able to get another job. And I'm not strong enough to be digging ditches all day. And I'm in a bad spot. I don't want to beg. I have too much pride to beg." So they say, "I know, I've got to conspire here. I've got to figure something out so that I'll have a place to go." So they decide to get in good with the clients. So this would be like if you had a business and you have clients, and now your controller there calls up your clients and says, "Hey, you owe us on these invoices. How much do you owe?" And then they tell them and they cut it. They cut one by 50%, cut another one by 30%. It's like, "I'm going to come get a job with you after I get out of here. But before I do, I'm going to cut enough of your debts down so that this will be a really good situation here." Well, the manager finds out about it. So you find out that this is going on in your business. But instead of being furious and firing the guy, you're also a crook. And you're like, "Hey, that was pretty clever." So you praise the guy like, that was a smooth move you just did right there. I didn't see that one coming. But because you're also crooked, you appreciate the crookedness that you've just seen in this individual. And then Jesus starts talking about it. Jesus gives the lesson, "Make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings." And people read this and they think that Jesus is praising what has taken place. And that's a hard thing to consider, because Jesus, the Son of God, is saying, "Hey, go and make friends with unrighteous wealth, and they'll receive you after it's all over." So let's talk about the preconceived ideas. People often identify this rich man as being God. And that is where the difficulty begins in interpretation. When you bring that into the text, you're going to be jumping through some hoops. And then when you take Jesus' statement there in verse 9 that we just read, and you think that Jesus is telling us that we should be like these unfaithful people here, these people that are dealing in this way, we're now stuck in this tough spot where we've got God that's praising people for wickedness, and we've got Jesus saying, "Yeah, go and make friends with unrighteous stuff." But is there another way that we can look at this? And I want to suggest to you that there is another way to view what's going on. Why would God be seen as praising a man for lying, cheating, and stealing? Well, I think that you're right to have struggles with that thought. I think that should cause us to rethink our entire interpretation instead of trying to explain it away. On the left-hand side of the front page in this lesson, I included a few warm-up questions in the mind, and I want to go back to those now. First warm-up question was why or would God commend a man for behaving unrighteously? Now, I'm not saying that you have an obvious answer to that. We would, I think, come in with an assumption that no, God is not going to be commending unrighteous behavior. And I think there's a good reason for us to have that assumption when we come into a text, based on what we know of God in Scripture. Next question I had asked is, do you want to share in the eternal home of those who are described by Jesus as unrighteous? Just take that as a surface question and ask yourself, if Jesus is saying there is an eternal home for unrighteous men, and then I immediately ask you, do you want to share in that home? What would you say? No. We'll come back to that. And then what was the response of the hearers to this parable? We're going to come back to that as we go through this here in just a couple of moments. We know from verse 1 that Jesus is speaking to his disciples, but Jesus is not speaking to his disciples alone. In other words, he is speaking to his disciples right here, but he's doing it in the presence of some other people. And we know that because of the following verses. There is going to be a reaction among those that are not Jesus' disciples to the words that he has just spoken. And this is a key to interpretation. Jesus oftentimes had a lesson for his disciples about the religious teachers of his day. Can you think of some times that Jesus was speaking to his disciples, but he was talking about the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees? And what types of things does Jesus tell his disciples about those leaders? Yeah, they're hypocrites, wicked. There's a word he often uses, beware. Beware the leaven of. Jesus was regularly warning his disciples about the leaders of the Jewish people. Because Jesus, of course, knows that his disciples are going to be leaders in the faith. There's a reason he tells them, you beware of this type of behavior, because he knows that it would be very easy for them to become the exact same thing after he's left the earth. Think about how easy it would be for the apostles to give in to the temptation to become like the rulers that Jesus had been interacting with. They're about to go out and preach the gospel to all creation. They're about to have the church growing up all around them in all these different areas. And you know, when you're teaching people the gospel like that, especially as one working miracles and doing tremendous things, everybody's going to have questions for you, right? Everybody's going to want to be interacting with you and knowing what you have to say, what you have to teach. That really tempts anybody to arrogance, does it not? When you've got all these people that want to hear what you have to say, all of these people that want to talk to you all the time, it is very, very easy to become pretty haughty, pretty arrogant. And there are other things that come along with the type of worldliness that would introduce. Just look at mega churches today. How many stories have you seen about private jets and mansions that are in the tens of millions of dollars, estates, tremendous wealth coming from leading churches? And the apostles were leading many churches. Don't you think they could have had the great opportunity to become quite wealthy because of their work? I mean, we think of the apostles, and rightly we remember that all of them except for John were killed in persecutions from what we read. All of them gave their lives for Christ, and John suffered much. But it could have easily gone another direction. It could very easily have become about wealth and prestige and fame and worldly gain. Sure. They were quite young. Yes, they were quite young when they began following Jesus. That's an excellent point to bring up because they lived to be quite old. I mean, John lives to, from what we can understand, the early 100s. So he is an old man, but it's because he started young. When they followed Jesus, they were in that age of life where this would have been incredibly alluring to them. But let's look to verse 10. Someone read chapter 16 and verse 10. It's interesting to me that we consider verses 1 through 9 to be the parable of the unjust steward, as though that's where Jesus stops teaching on the lesson that he just gave. But verse 9 does not end the conversation around this parable that was just given. He continues speaking several more verses around lessons that are rooted in the parable that he just gave. We read verse 9 a moment ago, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. Then he says, verse 10, which was just read for us, he who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much. And he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. His parable just told us about someone being unrighteous. This person was unrighteous when dealing with their manager's money. Then they were unrighteous further with their unmanager whenever they were looking to lose their job, when they were about to be kicked out of this position. So they were unrighteous already, and that's why they were getting fired. And what did they do? Did they stop their unrighteousness? They increased their unrighteousness, because those that are unrighteous in a little will become unrighteous in much. And those that are righteous in little will become righteous in much. These things, in other words, tend to have their own momentum. And haven't we seen that in our own lives? Have you seen sin in your life that started small and snowballed to be a big issue? And likewise, have you seen good? Things that you were choosing to do that were righteous that snowballed to become bigger. This is how it works for us. We want to set momentum with small choices because of where it goes. And we all get tempted to go down these paths repeatedly. It's not like a once and done thing. And sometimes we might even be surprised at how we get tempted. Why do we choose to be righteous in the small things? Because we should know what happens when we choose to be unrighteous in those same small things. You want to teach a lesson to your kids, I know I do. This is how we teach them. Why shouldn't I just have this lie? Why shouldn't I just take this little bit that I'm not supposed to? Because it's not just about that. It's about what will come from it, as Jesus has told us, and he's doing it from this same parable. So let's keep looking. We don't need to force an interpretation wherein the rich man is God. And so I want to free you from that right now. The rich man is not God in this parable. The rich man is not God. And you say, well, who is the rich man? Does it have to even be an individual? That's the point of a parable a lot of times, is to teach a lesson. We don't always have to take parables and assign to them a particular individual or particular, this has to all correspond. That's not what a parable always is. A lot of times a parable is just a story to teach a lesson. So there may be an interpretation. You can think of who you want this to be. Maybe it's the wealthy of their own society. I think that's probably a more general lesson that's being given. You actually have rich men in their society. And then you actually have people that are doing other wicked things alongside the rich men, and they're being praised for it. But it almost doesn't even matter. I don't even want to get into it. Because what's causing a bad interpretation of this parable is this desire we have to give some corresponding, this is this person, this is this person, this is referring to that group. And that can sometimes be dangerous for us because we get into that situation where we can't see the forest for the trees. We're looking too closely at details and not listening to what Jesus is teaching. He's telling us a story about a wicked rich man who has a wicked manager. And that wicked manager grows in wickedness. And the wicked rich man praises the growth in wickedness because they're both shrewd. And he says the sons of this age are more shrewd than the sons of light. The contrast that's being given is between the shrewdness of the sons of this age and the sons of light. And he continues on from there, talking about responsibility and righteous treatment of wealth. Many identify the eternal dwellings of verse 9 with heaven. And I want to free you from that. The word eternal dwellings is purposely neutral from Jesus. It's like us saying the afterlife. Hey, after this life is over, you'll go into the afterlife. Is that a good thing or is it a bad thing? It depends. It depends. Jesus uses a term here that is not a heavenly dwelling. He just calls it your eternal dwelling because he's talking about groups of people and where groups of people are going to go. And dare I suggest to you that Jesus is in fact being a bit sarcastic. He does that sometimes. Jesus has humor. He does use sarcasm. Paul was big on sarcasm. My wife has loathed me reminding her of that so often. I tend to be sarcastic, and maybe that's why I can see sarcasm so well, because it's a native tongue. Jesus is making this a little bit biting toward the leaders of his day. We're going to see that more as we keep walking through the following verses. But I want to suggest to you that when he says, make friends for yourself by means of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, he's being serious. If you live like these people, it will fail. And they will welcome you into eternal dwellings. If we make choices like the people in this parable are making, we will end up like the people in this parable. If we defraud one another, our defrauding will grow worse and worse, as verse 10 is alluding to. And the only people that will want to be friends with us are those who behave like that. Does that sound like a good life to you? Do you want to be the type of person who defrauds others and it fails? You get caught just like this manager did. And so that the only people that want to befriend you are others who are interested in defrauding. That's what you have in this parable. You have a whole environment of cheaters. From the rich man to the manager to the people that owe that rich man. Everybody in this story is defrauding one another. And Jesus gives the lesson, make friends for yourselves through unrighteousness so that you've got someone to welcome you into your eternal dwellings. Live like these people, get friends like these people, fail like these people, go to eternity with these people. It's not the life that we're being called to. Because those of this age are more shrewd than the sons of light. That's how people of this world behave. That's not how sons of light behave. Do you want to be in the eternal dwellings of money-loving swindlers? I don't. Jesus is suggesting that we do not follow their path, not that we do follow their path. How do we know that this is his purpose? Because of the following verses. Context is everything. And so what I am going to do now is not just tell you, hey, that's the interpretation, let's go. I'm going to let Jesus show you the lesson, because that's what he does after he tells stories. Jesus tells stories, and then he explains the meaning. And I think this is a parable where we have just totally ignored Jesus' explanation of the meaning. Let him teach us what he's saying in these following verses. Let's understand it. So, we already read verse 9. He says this is a lesson. Then we read verse 10. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous in much. We're going to fill in the gap between these verses in a moment. Right now, drop down to verse 14 and 15 and see what he says. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. And he said to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. Why were they scoffing at Jesus? Because Luke tells us they love money. They are lovers of money. This whole section is about the love of money. And these individuals that are listening, note that he's not alone. He's speaking to his disciples. It's like he's got this crowd in front of him, but then all these people standing around. And those standing around are Pharisees that love money. And Jesus tells the disciples, hey, here's a lesson for you about this unrighteous group of people defrauding one another so that they can have more money. And the Pharisees are over here like, why is he telling that? Why is he talking about that? Because they loved money. And Jesus is making money sound like it's something that corrupts. No. Jesus is missing the point to them. And Jesus says to them, you are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men. Who in the parable was justifying themselves in the sight of men? The manager. The manager here is seeking his own benefit, and he's calling these debt owers to him and cutting their money down. Then the rich man is like, hey, that was pretty smart. You have someone here that's seeking their own good, seeking their own benefit. They're seeking to be justified before other people because they have to have a selfish interest. He needs a new job. He needs a new place to go. Seeking justification in front of others. And Jesus says, you are those that behave in these types of ways. God knows your hearts. And that which is highly esteemed among men. What's been highly esteemed in this text? The rich man was highly esteeming the shrewdness of this manager. That type of shrewd behavior might be respectable among other men, but God knows your hearts. You are those that seek these types of relationships. You are those that are behaving like that person. You lovers of money, he says, and it's detestable in the sight of God. We don't need to go into this parable to find out how we should imitate the manager, which is what most interpretations end up come from this. We need to go into this parable and figure out how not to be like the manager. How not to be like the ruler, the wealthy man. How not to be like the people that accepted their debts being cut in half and cut down. That's theft. Don't be like those people. That's dishonesty. It's cheating and lying and stealing. Jesus is saying the Pharisees are like that. That's how they behave. Don't be like them, because the only friends you'll have are people that are like them. This is an excellent parable to share with our children. Don't make small bad choices. Don't cheat people. Don't steal. Why? Because the only people that will want to be in relationship with you are those that behave like that. And the only people that will then one day welcome us into eternity are people like that. Don't go with them. The entire section, Luke chapter 16, 1 through 15, is dealing with the love of money. The Pharisees were shrewd. They valued shrewdness in others. And Jesus is going to give several lessons. All right, so here are the lessons that are actually given by Jesus after this parable. He tells the story, and the first we read in verse 9, they will share an eternal dwelling. Those are your friends, they will share in a dwelling together. So that's lesson number 1. That's not all. Lesson number 2 that he gave was in verse 10, which we read. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much, unrighteous in much. They've been unfaithful stewards. We should only expect more unfaithfulness from them. That's it. You want to know what you should expect from rulers of our society? See how they behave so far. There you go. And, I say that. We all get the leaders we deserve as a nation. We receive the leaders that we deserve. When we're a materialistic, shrewd nation, should we not expect materialistic, shrewd leaders to rise among us and to be exalted? When you look at rulers of any people, you see the values of the people. If you don't like the value of the rulers, there's a deeper problem. The values of the people. This is just how it works when you elect your rulers. What kind of friends do you want? What kind of people do you want to be? What do you value? So that's verse 10. But there are other couple of verses that we haven't read yet. So let's read verses 11 and 12. Someone pick that up for us, please. Pause there. We're 11 and 12 for now. Yep. All right, so therefore, if you've not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, remember who's listening to him. The Pharisees are listening to him. They've been very involved in unrighteous wealth. How have they used it? Have they been faithful with it? Have they taken the means that they were able to have and to use to glorify God and to take care of those that needed to be cared for? Did they stay humble so that they interacted with the lowly people to try to educate them spiritually and bring them along in the way? Or did they use the wealth that they got their hands on for unrighteous things, like separating themselves from the people so that they could be better than them, giving themselves luxury while ignoring the needs of the people, exalting all of the rules that they created so that it's impossible for anybody else to keep, exalting their own righteousness, in show at least, and then not being concerned about the plight of the people that were struggling? Jesus was the exact contrast of the rulers of his day in every way. They took unrighteous money that they did have and became more unrighteous with it. Jesus, the money that was given to him, was used for needs and then doing the other things that had to be done. But he wasn't giving himself a lap of luxury. He was too busy working for the people. He didn't exalt himself among others so that he wouldn't talk to them. He came for those that were sick, for those that were well, have no need of a physician. Jesus' mindset as the Son of God was full of humility and love and serious consideration for the people that were around him. He labored for their good. Can you say that about the Pharisees? Had they been laboring for the good of the people? No. You hadn't been unfaithful, Jesus is saying. With the unrighteous wealth that you haven't been faithful, with the unrighteous wealth. Who will entrust the true riches to you? Who is going to give them more? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? Again, see how that ties directly back to the parable? He didn't leave the interpretation of the parable. You have this manager that has been unfaithful in the use of another's wealth. Who is going to give him more? This is unwise. Why would any of those others in those other homes want him to come and work for them, run their books? They might find a position for him for a while because they appreciate his shrewdness, but they're not stupid. Let's read verse 13. Isn't that what the manager was trying to do? He was serving two masters. He was serving the rich man until that didn't seem like it was going to work out. And then he was serving, you could say himself, ultimately. He was also acting like he was serving the others that owed money. And Jesus says, no one can serve two masters. You have to choose. When you have two masters that are going different directions, you have to choose. You can't serve them both. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and what? Wealth. In this parable, wealth is now being brought up as the topic at hand. You cannot serve them both. So who is it that you think Jesus is really alluding to that has been serving wealth instead of God? The Pharisees. They were lovers of money. Jesus he's nailing them between the eyes on this money stuff. You can see why they scoff in the next verse, because they know exactly what he's saying. They didn't hear this parable and get confused. They heard this parable and took offense because they knew that he's talking about them as shrewd individuals who sometimes defraud, who cheat other people to get ahead, that do whatever they got to do to survive. And Jesus is just coming, hitting them. The only friends you're going to have, it's not God. They're serving a different friend. They're serving people like them. Who is it that the Pharisees really catered to? Who is it they were really about in their society? Jesus is saying it's not the people, it's the rich, because they wanted a piece of that. It's dangerous to make too many applications to today, because then people think you're getting political, and that's like an unspoken code that we have in our churches today, is we're not allowed to ever touch on political things, which is a victory of Satan, by the way. I just want to note that that's exactly how the world wants us to do. They want us to wall off so that we're not part of the world. They want us to withdraw into our corner and let the world do its thing, and we're over here just talking in our bubble as though what we're saying isn't relevant to every aspect of life. But when you see wealthy people in cahoots, you see exactly what Jesus is talking about. When you see that things are being shaped in such a way to serve the wealthy, and this is no single party, this is our entire society, this is how it works, okay? When you see that all going along, you can only expect more of it. That's what Jesus says. Because the sons of this age are shrewd, and they value shrewdness. We are not to be like them. We are sons of light. And we do not treat one another shrewdly. We are to love one another. We are to think more highly of others than of ourselves. We are to serve. They were trying to serve two masters. Don't, and I say don't as though I'm charging you, and I'm not charging you, I'm charging myself more than I'm charging you. We live in one of the wealthiest cities in the wealthiest country on the planet. Everyone in here, no matter how much you have in the bank account, you are one of the wealthiest humans that has ever lived. It doesn't feel like that because we're all fighting to pay our bills and everything, but we live in mansions. And I don't care how big your house is. Historically speaking, we're living in mansions. Our carriages are more finely adorned than basically any carriages of the kings you can read about in Scripture. It is easy for us to read these parables and think it's not talking about us. It's talking about those rich people. We are the rich people. You travel anywhere else basically on the planet and you will see it like that. Even other countries that are first world, we have wealth unbelievable around us. So when we read parables of this nature, we need to make sure that we are listening. You cannot serve two masters. You can't do it. The temptation will constantly be to be shrewd like the world around us. We're business people. We're professionals. We build things. And sometimes, hey, that's dirty. I have felt that way in business. I'll just tell you. The constant temptation is there to misrepresent, to bend the truth, to set things in your favor. It's always present. The sons of this age are more shrewd than the sons of light. We have to choose which side we're going to be on. We have to choose who we're going to be friends with. We have to seek out people that are more like us and less like the world. And there aren't that many of them. So it makes it hard. But we can only serve one master. And we have to decide who that master is. We might also note verse 15. You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your heart. For that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. Their heart were set on physical things, on things that are highly exalted among men. How easy is it for us here to set our hearts on things that are highly esteemed among men? What are the things that are highly esteemed in our society, in our community right now? If you want to be thought of very highly in Frisco, Texas today, what types of things do you need? I'm serious, throw them out. What are they? Nice car. Let's get a sweet ride. Then people will see us rolling by, and they're going to say, that's somebody. What else? A big, nice home. It has to be prettier than your neighbors because you got to be better than your neighbors, obviously. How can you be highly esteemed if you're not better than the people around you, right? Okay, what else do we need? Education, jewelry. Yeah, right. If we can just talk about how many diplomas we have up on the wall, clearly I'm more intelligent than you. So I'm now more highly exalted. And if I have this bling all on me, then people are going to see me coming. They're going to say, that person right there obviously has money to spare. They're more highly exalted than I am because I got to fight to pay my bills. What else do I need to have? Anything you can think of. Oh, yeah, I want the entourage, and it has to be the right entourage. I want the people that others know. I want others to see me shaking hands with the people that are high and mighty so they know I'm like them. Better yet, I could be the person that's high and mighty, and people could be amazed to come shake my hand. Yeah, oh, I need a title. Yeah, give me a nice title, an executive title, so that people will know I've got people at my beck and call. All of these things to be highly exalted among men. And there's a lot more. Our family has to look the part all the time, right? Put together. Because I want to make sure you know I've done a better job of this parenting thing than you. For you, it's hard. For me, I got this thing. Just go on and on. These things are what it takes to be highly esteemed among men. Jesus doesn't care so much about that. He says what's highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. All of that stuff is detestable to God. He thinks it's disgusting. When you think about the root why would God think it's disgusting? I'm not, we got to give the disclaimer. I'm not saying you can't have a nice car. Why is it detestable in the sight of God? Because it's us trying to exalt ourselves over our brothers and sisters. You remember when the Corinthians were divided against one another? And in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul comes out swinging. And he takes them to task over this. And he builds on it for a couple of chapters. And what he ends up saying to them is that the problem is that they are breaking into factions so that they can see themselves as greater than the others. Otherwise, why have factions among you? They were grouping so that you could know they're part of this group, and therefore they're better. We do this in churches as well. We do this in churches of Christ. We have to be better than others so that we feel like we're somebody. But we should feel like we're somebody because we are children of God. Our identity is rooted in our relationship to God, not in our status among others. You know, the thing that drives me most crazy as a parent is when my kids start fighting. There is nothing that makes me more frustrated more quickly in my house than to hear my kids bickering and fighting among themselves. Am I alone in this? This is like, I would rather see my kids actually, and maybe this isn't healthy, whatever. I would rather see my kids working together to get something past me than to see them fighting one another. By far. And I've told them this many times, like, why can't you guys work together and get away with more collectively? I want to see them cooperating because I want my kids to love each other. And it just drives me nuts when they don't. Imagine how God feels when he looks at humanity and his image is in every single person. They are image bearers. And he sees us fighting, hating, and exalting ourselves one above another. And we're using the stupidest stuff to do it with. And what is your expensive car to God? He made all things. What are those nice clothes to God who adorns the lilies of the field? You can't compare to that beauty. All of this is so absurd. And Jesus is just telling us, what are you thinking? What are you thinking? It's detestable in the sight of God. The parable of the unjust steward is a pointed parable meant to condemn the love of money among the Pharisees. The lesson of our Lord is clear. As long as we do not force unnecessary interpretations on the text, we can see shining through how much Jesus despises this materialism around him. May we always seek to remember the Lord's teaching on wealth, strive to be lovers of God rather than lovers of wealth. And the thing that is scariest to me is how normalized this amount of wealth is to us, and we don't even see that we've gone down the same path. And I speak for myself. I've gone down the same path that Jesus so often is condemning. Thank you for your attention this morning. I hope that this parable is more clear to you now than it has ever been, that we can take the lessons from it that Jesus intended us to take from it, to choose to be like the sons of light and not the sons of this world, and to choose to love God rather than things. Thank you very much, and we'll stop there.